Hello, I am very happy and honored to be here today in a room filled with women who move and shake and recreate and reinvent and reconceive and transform the world. I really need to be in a room today with all of you. In the midst of women who are strong, who are united, who are shifting this paradigm of this terrible, wondrous world that we're living in right now. I was asked to talk about V-Day, the global movement to end violence against women and girls, and nothing would give me more pleasure than to talk about a worldwide movement that has spread in the last 10 years to 120 countries, from Islamabad to Antarctica, from little village to big cities, a movement that began really by saying the word vagina. And I want to say that London was one of the very first places I got to say the word vagina and say it a lot. It is a wildly vagina-friendly city, and it has become a wildly vagina-friendly country. As a matter of fact, I think there were over 60 V-Days in Britain last year. I would love to talk about V-Day all afternoon, but I have just returned from a month in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if you will let me, I feel I am compelled by outrage, by sorrow, and by a deep need to talk about the situation there as a way of talking about V-Day and the global struggle to end violence against women and girls. I was invited to the DRC over 2 years ago by an extraordinary doctor named Dr. Denis Mukwege. I met him. I was asked by the UN to interview him in New York. And that interview changed my life because, first of all, I met a man who is probably as noble as any man I've met on the planet, who was devoting his life to working in a clinic in the bush, sewing up women as fast as the militias were ripping them apart. And it was at that moment that I was introduced to the atrocities and the terrible, terrible situation that is going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I feel now, having just returned from a month there, and it was my third trip in the last 18 months. The last day that I was there, I was at the Pansy Hospital, which is Dr. Mukwege's hospital, where at any given time now, there are over 300 women who have been seriously raped and tortured, suffering atrocities and things that have occurred to their bodies that I don't want to go into depth here today because it's a luncheon, but they are so beyond the imagination. And my last day there, we were doing trauma work all week, and we were dancing, and at the end of the dance, I promised them that I would carry their message to the world and bring all of you to come and support them because they are in such dire shape. More people have been killed in the Congo in the last 10 years or have died of the consequences of war, 5.4 million, than any place since World War II. And yet we do not define it as genocide. I have been thinking since I've been back in Europe, why is it that the world has not awakened to what is happening there? Why don't we call it genocide? Do people have to die in millions over a short period of time for it to be defined as genocide, as in Rwanda? Or is the slow murdering of people over time something else? Is it that the Congo has been plundered for so many years, beginning with King Leopold, who literally used it as a cash cow, taking out as many resources as he could and killing 13 million Congolese, so that the Congolese people don't even exist in the consciousness of the world? Is it simply racism, that it is a conflict where white people are not involved and so the world has not awakened to what is going on and the world does not care? Or is it finally that the basic of the war and the structure of the war is really being fought on the bodies of women, and the world does not give a goddamn about women, and particularly black women? I want to talk today about what's going on there because, having been in V-Day for the last 10 years and having traveled to over 60 countries, I have witnessed what I am now calling femicide, which I believe is a global system that is destroying women throughout the globe. And I don't think it's accidental. I think that patriarchy in its later stages has now designed a plan and a structure which is annihilating women in every single country that I've been to. But I want to say what is going on in the DRC. I have been to Haiti, I have been to Bosnia during the war, I have been to Afghanistan, I have been to many war zones. Nothing I have seen in my experience compares to what is going on in the DRC. And when I returned from Afghanistan in 1994, and I came back and I said to everybody in the West, there is something going on that is so horrific in Afghanistan. The undermining of women's rights, the enforced veiling of women, the refusing to allow women to be educated or to hold jobs, the raping of women, the beating of women. I went to every outlet, every media outlet in the West, and at the time I was told, except for one, no one cares about the women of Afghanistan. We're not interested. Well, of course, we know a year later 9/11 happened, and everyone was suddenly interested in the women of Afghanistan. What I want to say about the Congo is that what happened as a result of the Taliban is the existence of the Taliban in the consciousness of the world spread a kind of violence towards women throughout that region, so that now honor killings and burying women alive and stoning women has become common practice in many places. And if we do not stop what is happening in the DRC, I promise you, we will see the exact same thing happening throughout Africa and eventually all of the world. I want to talk a little bit about what is happening there. It's brutal and it's difficult. When people talk about the DRC, they often say it's too complex a situation, there are all these militias fighting. It is basically an economic war, and we here in the West, we in Britain, in the US, Belgium, we are all benefiting from the products that come out of the Congo, particularly coltan, which is here to fill our cell phones and Blackberries and PlayStations. And many of the militias that are fighting there are protecting mines, which protects the interests of the West. So all of us are part of the story of the Congo. But really what is going on in the Congo is femicide. There is a war being waged on the bodies of women. And that war, at this point, has no boundaries because of complete impunity. It has actually rape become a country sport. It began with the genocidaires from Rwanda coming over the border and beginning to rape Congolese women. And it is now spread to all the militias and all of ordinary life being engaged in rape as a common activity. But I want to just tell you a little bit about the Panzi Hospital, which is in Bukavu, where I've now spent quite a bit of time interviewing hundreds of women. And the patterns I have seen there are patterns that are very clear that there is a direct and systematic attempt to destroy the bodies of women in an attempt to make it impossible for the Congolese people to reproduce, for women to reproduce, for women to have sex in the future, for women to go on as human beings. And I just want to give you a kind of indication of those patterns. We have seen militias with AIDS being let loose from prison to rape the population. We have seen militias gang raping hundreds of women with the attempt to give them STDs. We have seen militias raping women in front of their husbands, thereby destroying the family structure. We've seen militias using sticks and knives and many penises to destroy vaginas and create fistula. We've seen militias cutting off women's heads in front of their husbands' heads in front of them and leaving them there for hours. We've seen children, and many children, who are being raped from the ages of 10 months up to 80 years old. And we've seen little girls being held for over 2 years as sex slaves by the military and being raped over and over and over. We've seen women who are carrying the babies of their rapists, and so they are exiled from their communities, and there are many, many now children of rape who will have a very difficult time finding any structure or any family unit that will ever incorporate them. And there are horrible stories. There are horrible stories of cannibalism, of things I will not talk about here at dinner, but I urge you to read up, because what we are seeing there is a step beyond anything really we can imagine in human consciousness. And I sat with many women in my last trip to talk about how it is that now, even after we've launched a campaign for a year, and the UN is aware of this, and world bodies are aware of this, and that it still continues. That it still continues after 10 years. In the last 6 months, 3,500 women have been raped in northern Kivu. And I want to know why we have 17,000 UN peacekeepers when every official I spoke to in the Congo said nothing less than 50,000 peacekeepers would ever protect women in the bush. Why don't the international laws apply to the Congo, the responsibility to protect when people can't protect themselves? I have visited the